Hello, my name is Nigel,
My name is Nam Hussein.
And my name is Derek Thomas.
and this is our project about the use of linear algebra in genetics.
Okay, so a little introduction to genetics. We can start off by talking about genotypes. All living organisms have genotypes, a dominant and a recessive trait. What we can see how genotypes play a role is through Punnett squares. Punnett squares pretty much map out what two parent genotypes and their outcomes, pretty much. So over here we have two heterozygous apples. What I mean by that is they each have one dominant trait, one recessive trait, and their outcomes could be homozygous dominant apple, meaning it has two big E's. Then we have two heterozygous apples, like their parents, and one homozygous recessive apple. Pretty much why these two look the same as a homozygous dominant apple is because the dominant trait will always overpower the recessive. So that's why it would look the same as the homozygous dominant apple compared to the homozygous recessive apple.
So now we'll be talking about concepts from linear algebra and how they apply to genetics. But before, the main concept we use is in linear algebra that applies to genetics is stochastic matrix. But before we see the application, we have to know what a stochastic matrix is. A stochastic matrix is a matrix, the elements of which are probability values between 0 and 1, and the sum of each column should equal 1. The stochastic matrix is also called the transition probability matrix, and we represent that with the letter P, and then here these represents the percentages. And so this is an example problem using the stochastic matrix. So initially, we have an initial population, x0, of 100,000 people in a town, right? And there's 2 service providers and people with no service. This number represents the number of people in each service or with no service. And so then if we wanted to find the number of people who have each service or no service, we would multiply this by the probability transition matrix, and that's where P comes into play, the stochastic matrix. And so here you can see that these represent percentages of people who go from one service to another service. So along the top we have A, B, no TV, and then along the side we have A, B, no TV. And so the probability represents the people who go from one on the top to another service, which is represented by the side. And so to find the population of people within each service after 1 year, you would multiply P by XO, or initial population, and that's done over here, as you can see. And we would get 23,250 people in service A, 28,750 people in service B, and 48,000 people with no service provider after 1 year. And this becomes the new population after 1 year. So we represent that with X1.
So now we learned two concepts, one of genetics and one of linear algebra. How do they combine with each other? The way we do it is by using linear algebra to figure out the future generations of crossbreeding. So let's say, for example, we have the apple from before. We have a heterozygous apple. And we want to figure out what's the future generation if we crossbreed a certain population with said heterozygous apple. So we will make a probability matrix. Here I've already done it for you, but let me explain the logic behind it. So we have the heterozygous apple, and we crossbreed it with a dominant apple, homozygous dominant apple. What's the possibility that we will get a homozygous dominant apple? That would be 50%, E times E. And then what would happen if, what's the possibility we'll get a heterozygous apple? That would also be 50%, is E and E, right? It's impossible for us to get a homozygous recessive apple, because both genes have, because this apple here is completely dominant, right? We apply these same principles throughout the board, and we will get the whole entire matrix at 3 by 3, and this will be our probability matrix. Let's say we're working at an apple orchard, as I said before, and we have a certain population, 15,000 dominant apples, 20,000 heterozygous apples, and 65,000 recessive apples. Now, we want to figure out what would that population be after a year, after crossbreeding with said heterozygous apple. So we would do P times XO equals X1, right? We have our matrix here, probability matrix, and we multiply with our population matrix, okay? This will give us our result, 17,500, and so on and so forth. Now, let's say we want to do another year. We would take that vector right there, and we would multiply it. P times x1 equals x2. And so that's it.
I'm Nigel.
I'm Niall,
I'm Derek.
and I hope you learned something from this presentation and how to apply linear algebra to genetics.